4 child predators unalived in jail. 4 child predators unalived in jail. Oh, let's check this out.
Child predators don't just face justice in the courtroom. Behind bars, they meet a different kind of reckoning. These men thought they could escape the full weight of their crimes, but what awaited them in prison was far worse than any sentence a judge could hand down. Inmates don't forgive, and for those who harm children, prison can become a death sentence. Today we're exposing the brutal fate of 4 predators who learned the hard way that in prison, your past can kill you. Leonard Nelson. Leonard Nelson, a 28-year-old man, serving a 4-year sentence for aggravated burglary and the sexual exploitation of a minor, thought his worst days were behind him when he was sentenced to just 4 years in prison. But what he didn't know was that stepping into that cell was the beginning of his darkest chapter. Nelson's crimes were disturbing, particularly because they involved videos of 2 minors imitating sexual acts, with Nelson's voice in the background instructing them on what to do. The defense tried to argue that Nelson was mentally impaired, claiming that he had the mind of an 8-year-old child.
Yo, what the hell? So you telling me he never grew up, but he does adult things? Mental.
Family members, including his aunt, pleaded for leniency on these grounds, but the evidence was damning, and the court found Nelson guilty. Once incarcerated, Nelson was placed in a facility that catered to inmates prone to misbehavior. It was a place where troubled individuals were kept under closer watch. But even in such a controlled environment, the dangers of prison life are ever present. In June 2016, just when it seemed Nelson might serve his time and move on, he was found dead in his cell. At first glance, prison officials believed it to be a suicide, given the stigma attached to his crimes and the mental health issues his defense had previously highlighted. It wouldn't have been surprising if Nelson had taken his own life, but this initial assessment quickly changed when the extent of his injuries became apparent. Nelson's head and neck bore signs of trauma that were inconsistent with a self-inflicted death, prompting an investigation that would soon lead authorities to Nelson's cellmate, Daniel Smith. Smith was serving a 5-year sentence for aggravated burglary and theft of property. He wasn't known for violent tendencies that could lead to murder, but once questioned, Smith confessed to the killing, revealing that the two had gotten into a scuffle after an argument. The exact details of what sparked the fight are unclear, but in the confined and volatile environment of a prison cell, it didn't take much to push someone over the edge. The specifics of how Smith carried out the murder were never fully disclosed. Reports didn't reveal the weapon used, if any, or the exact method of the killing, but the outcome was clear. Nelson was dead, and Smith was now facing even more time behind bars. Robert Munger. Up next is Robert Munger, a criminal whose fate was sealed long before he even stepped into his cell. After all, when you commit crimes as heinous as his, there's no escaping the judgment that waits. Munger, a 70-year-old, was convicted of multiple counts of child molestation and child pornography, crimes that had devastated numerous young lives. The court handed him a 43-year sentence, effectively condemning him to spend the rest of his life in prison. Upon his arrival at the Airway Heights Correctional Center in Washington State, Munger was assigned a cell with a younger inmate named Shane Goldsby. At first glance, this might have seemed like a routine pairing, but there was a dark connection between the 2 men that would soon lead to tragedy. Unbeknownst to the prison officials, Goldsby's younger sister was one of Munger's victims. Imagine being forced to live in close quarters with the person who had caused so much pain to your family. That was the situation Goldsby found himself in and day out. Munger, apparently unfazed by the potential danger, would reportedly taunt Goldsby, recounting the details of the abuse he had inflicted on Goldsby's sister. Goldsby later described how the tension inside him kept building. He was trapped, not just physically, but emotionally. Despite making requests to be moved to a different cell, Goldsby's pleas were ignored. As expected, in June 2020, Goldsby finally snapped. He attacked Munger in their shared cell, striking him repeatedly in the head. The violence was relentless. Goldsby didn't stop until Munger was dead. By the time correctional officers intervened, the damage had been done. Goldsby was quickly charged with first-degree murder and received an additional 25-year sentence on top of the time he was already serving. However, during his sentencing, he expressed deep regret for his actions, not just for the murder itself, but for the pain it caused Munger's family. David Oseas Ramirez. When criminals are sentenced to life behind bars, they're supposed to be off the streets and out of the public's reach. But for some, like David Ramirez, life in prison can be more dangerous than freedom ever was. Ramirez, 56, was arrested for a crime that shocked and horrified the community: the lewd and lascivious molestation of an 11-year-old girl. The crime was heinous, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. So, his trial in 2013 was swift, with the jury taking just 15 minutes to return a guilty verdict. The gravity of his crime led to a life sentence inside the Duval County Jail, a punishment that many believed was deserved given the nature of his offense. On July 30th, 2019, however, the dark reality of prison life caught up with Ramirez in the most brutal way imaginable. His cellmate, Paul Dixon, a man with a violent past, had been serving time for first-degree murder, among other serious charges. Dixon was no stranger to violence, having been convicted at just 17 for a murder that put him behind bars for life. The combination of Ramirez's history and Dixon's propensity for brutality was a recipe for disaster. The tension between Ramirez and Dixon began with a verbal altercation, the details of which remain unclear, but what is known is that it soon turned physical. Dixon, driven by a mix of anger and disdain, attacked Ramirez in their cell. The assault was brutal. Ramirez was beaten severely, and then, in a final act of violence, Dixon forced his head into the cell's toilet, drowning him. When prison authorities arrived, they found Ramirez dead. The scene was grim, and the cause of death was immediately apparent.
Well, I don't feel sorry for any of these people in this situations, or even the ones that are the heroes, basically unaliving the predators, bruh. You can't feel sorry for people like that, bruh. They all in there for a reason. You can't judge from outside of the place, bruh. But it's crazy how dangerous this world is. You don't know who to trust, literally, bruh. But you shouldn't live in fear.
Dixon, who had nothing to lose, was promptly charged with second-degree murder for the killing. But within the walls of Duval County Jail, Dixon's actions were likely met with silent approval by other inmates who viewed Ramirez's death as a form of prison justice. Clinton Simpson. Last but not least is Clinton Don Simpson, who in 2018 met a violent end in a jail cell that left everyone stunned, from his fellow inmates to the guards who found his lifeless body. Once a preacher at the Brown Trail Church of Christ in Bedford, Texas, Simpson was a man who...
This is supposed to be a place where you go to praise the Lord. And then you find such sinister people at that place, bruh. That is at the place where you trust the people the most. Because you wouldn't expect people to do things like this in a place of worship, my guy.
Held a position of trust in his community, but behind the facade of a caring community leader, Simpson harbored a dark and sinister secret. He was the owner of Mr. Don's Whistle Stop, a miniature train complex he had built on his property. For years, this whimsical attraction drew children to his home for birthday parties and other events. Unfortunately, this seemingly innocent setup became a nightmare for many families. In 2007, Simpson's world came crashing down when the parents of a young girl reported that he had molested their toddler daughter during one of these train rides. This report opened the floodgates, leading to the discovery that Simpson had allegedly molested at least a dozen children over the years. The accusations were severe, ranging from aggravated sexual assault to indecency with a child. It was a shocking revelation for the community, one that left many in disbelief. Simpson's legal journey was long and complex. His attorneys repeatedly argued that he was not competent to stand trial, citing mental health issues. This led to years of Simpson being in and out of state hospitals for evaluations. The legal battle dragged on, with many hoping for justice, while Simpson's competency was continually questioned. It wasn't until 2018 that he was finally declared fit to stand trial and was moved to the Tarrant County Jail in Texas. Inmates often have their own code of conduct, and those who harm children are at the very bottom of the hierarchy. So Simpson, now 76 years old and in a wheelchair, became a prime target. On November 7, 2018, he was placed in a cell with David Faustino Flores, a 42-year-old inmate with a history of mental health issues. Flores had been incarcerated for assaulting an elderly person, a crime he claimed he committed because he believed the man was a member of Al-Qaeda. Flores had also previously informed jail officials that he suffered from schizophrenia and had a history of hearing voices. He even requested to be placed in a separate cell, citing his inability to handle being around other people. However, this request was ignored, and Flores was placed in the same cell as Simpson. What happened next was a gruesome and tragic sequence of events. defense. Flores claimed that he began hearing voices, including those of his deceased mother and God, telling him that Simpson was Osama bin Laden and that he needed to kill him. In a frenzied attack, Flores repeatedly bashed Simpson's head into the floor, continuing even after Simpson fell out of his wheelchair. The assault was so brutal that it left Simpson with part of his skull caved in. He was rushed to John Peter Smith Hospital but succumbed to his injuries shortly after. If you enjoyed this video, you
Yo, this is crazy thumbnails though. I don't think that really happened. That is just over-exaggerating thumbnails right there. Come on. Now those people, they got what they deserved. I don't condone such stuff, bruh. That's not how you deal actually with it. Because there's a God there on top and only He can judge and only He can do things to you. So you can't want to take the law into your own hands right there. But yeah, guys, that's the video that we reacted to. Check us on the next one, bruh. It's gonna be lit.